Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Stevens, and I'm honored to introduce the next guest, who's a drum sister of mine. And this is Krista Holland. She's a multifaceted teacher. I think you're a yoga instructor, right? And a frame drummer and independent researcher. She's the founder of the Sacred Drumming Academy, where she shares her in-depth training and studies of the frame drum and the ancient mythology, lore, and history connected to the worldwide cross-cultural phenomenon of frame drumming, especially for women. And she is currently teaching a class at Shift Network on sacred drumming. It's really my honor to get to interview her today, that we can better understand the power of drums in the traditions of sound healing. Please welcome Krista Holland.
Thanks so much for having me here, Christine. It's just really a thrill to be here with you to delve into the subject of the drum.
Yes, and I love your title for today, Trance Drumming for Healing. And you and I have had a similar root teacher of Lane Redman, the author of When the Drummers Were Women. And maybe could you, however you'd like to begin, to welcome people and to share a little bit about the idea of sound healing with the frame drum.
Well, it goes so far back, this tradition, and what I've been really studying is the cross-cultural reach of the frame drum. So that's part of what I have been doing for the last 20 some years, really from the roots of my teacher Lane and her studies. It really inspired me to go on my own journey and independent research into the frame drum and how it was used in the ancient world and how it might apply to modern peoples.
And what is it that the frame drum brings for sound healing?
Well, I think that it has such a deep ancient history, and it's really also something that we can look at in cultural context. And the frame drum traditionally has been used in many different cultures. And so that's why I say, it's really a cross-cultural phenomenon, the frame drum. And so it really depends on the culture and it depends on the intention. But once that's set, we can look to the past. It's not that we're trying to recreate it, but it can give us some ideas of how it was used in healing in the past. And we have a lot of information actually from the ancient mystery schools, though much of that was secret, but just some of the written information about that. And also just the archaeological evidence is also something that we can look to. And then lore and folk tradition and story and the oral tradition of stories that have been handed down about the drum in healing.
Ooh. And you're surrounded by some beautiful drums. You want to tell us, like, what exactly is the frame drum? When did it get invented?
Well, right, the frame drum. So we have a whole array here. When did it get invented is a really good question. There's some scholarly debate and just some general ideas about it. No one really knows exactly, partly because the drum, given that it's traditionally made of wood and skin, it's perishable and it's degradable, or biodegradable. So the drums themselves have all gone back into the earth for the most part, but it looks to be there was a very strong center in the Middle East and in Turkey, and then the drum travels over to Crete and to Greece, and it goes through Italy, and it's found in Scandinavia and their indigenous traditions. There's a Scottish tradition that goes back at least 500 years by written records, and of course, North Africa, India. So it really shows up all over the world, Israel, Palestine. So these different traditions or these different cultures have different ways of using the drum. And the frame drum is one that the skin is larger and wider than the depth of the shell. And that's really what indicates that it's a frame drum. And we see frame drums that are used with a beater, which we see in the Americas. And then there's this whole other tradition where the drum is played with the hands.
Beautiful. I'm just excited to hear you play all of those. So then you wanted to talk today with our community here on the Sound Healing Summit a little bit about trance and its relation to the sonic quality of the frame drum and rhythm. And we certainly know rhythm in my work too as a drummer, we're drum sisters that we love entrainment and what that creates scientifically. And then as you bring in the mythology and the cross-cultural application. So maybe just in a practical sense, what is trance in your sense as a frame drummer?
Trance, it's a big word. And I think it's sometimes a misunderstood word, though it's coming more into the fore. People are looking for ways to work with consciousness. And trance is one of the ways that people have worked with their own consciousness for thousands and thousands of years. Trance is to bring over, to reach across. And sometimes that means reaching across from one state of awareness to another. And trance also has a very deep, wide, cross-cultural tradition. In fact, many of the anthropologists that study this say approximately 90% of cultures on the planet historically have had some trance-based practice or rituals. And there's lots of different ways that people enter into trance state. And what that is changing the consciousness from our normal everyday kind of waking awareness to something that might take us into a deeper awareness or a different shift of consciousness. And some of the modern researchers are, of course, looking into what's happening with the brain waves when someone enters a trance state. And we could also, in a sense, say it would be a flow state. So people who run long distance, or in the ancient days and even still in indigenous cultures around the world, doing things like fasting and some kind of sensory deprivation, or using a drum for entrainment and for that driving mechanism. So the drum is very rich in its historical usage of creating a trance state of mind.
Is there specific rhythms? I know when I was working in Iraq that I met Sufis who have the 22-inch frame drum called daf. And there were specific rhythms for the practices of ceremony. I didn't experience a healing ceremony, but I did experience spiritual practice that was repetition and movement and chanting and drumming and for hours, zikr. So I just wonder, are there special rhythms for trance?
I think there are, and I think it depends on the culture. There's also some talk about what tempo would bring a mind into trance state. And there's debate about that as well, something from 180 beats per minute all the way up to like 400 beats per minute. So kind of a quick pace, driving, consistent, repetitive rhythm. And then each tradition, each culture would have different traditional rhythms that were handed down through the line. And those are things that also are regional and are placed into context. And that's another really important aspect about talking about these traditions is how it's placed into context and how the information is passed down. And in the West, of course, we've lost so much connection to ancient tradition or to folk wisdom and those kinds of things. So the way I approach it really as an independent researcher and with a fascination and a deep respect for these different cultures. So that's something that if we were really to look at what rhythm, we would be talking about specifically what culture and what context we are using those rhythms within.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And thank you for honoring those cultural traditions. And well, we would love to experience whatever you'd like to share with us without words, more with the drum language of an experience of trance rhythms.
Let's see. Okay. So this is an 18-inch tar style frame drum. Now just imagine that goes on all night and someone else has another beat going and there's some kind of clave type of pulse being held. And so that's one of the ways that the drum is starting to move people's awareness.
So just break down the rhythm you played for us. It was very enchanting. It had different pitches. Even, we tend to think of the drum as just one note, but it had different pitches.
Well, that's from the tradition that you've also been introduced to from Hamza el-Din, who was Nubian, North African drummer. So it's a little play on that. But it's also just in the moment improvisational feel and flow. So what I do is I would learn a structure of a rhythm, and then in the moment, like we are here today, I would just let whatever was coming through. So there is tradition to all of these cultures, of course, and even in trance, ritual, oftentimes there is a very strong protocol and there is a disciplined structure to it. So it's not also just a free for all, but then within that structure, there is the flow and that present moment awareness. So both things can happen simultaneously. And I think that in itself for modern drummers is a way in where we can learn traditional rhythms from cultures that are offering that and that we're exchanging in a cultural exchange. And then also there's something to being in flow. And that brings us to that modern word of flow state, which in a sense we can exchange for trance, but there's a little bit of a different feel to that.
Well, we would love to hear any of the other drums or any other patterns you want to share today. I definitely felt it takes time. Like you said, imagining it all night long. As you played, I noticed I started rocking, or sort of a body was recognizing. It's so cool to know that you were just improvising that and being in your own creative flow. To make it a repetition, though, you must have to listen to yourself on some level and be able to be so accurate to keep it going.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. This is a beautiful frame drum made by a man from Poland, Zelazek, and it's old bogwood that has been pulled out of one of the rivers, I believe, up there, or a lake. And so it's old oak, and this is a natural skin. I don't play on natural skin as much. When we play the frame drum as modern practitioners and players, there's so many different techniques and different sounds and snapping, and from the southern India, the kiritakas. But when we're talking about trance, sometimes that's, again, something that's going to be very simplistic and repetitious. In different cultures that use the beater, for instance, we talked about that quick pulse of 180 to 200 something beats per minute. 3 to 4 beats per second. So it's really a driving mechanism. So different ways of approaching the playing, but
Well, that was beautiful. So I know that today you had prepared to do some experience for those people that are here that have an interest in sound healing, or may have played drums or may have never played a drum before. And it's one of the easiest probably instruments to get people started on. Is just this pulse that we all have, this heartbeat that we all have. And I love that about your sacred drumming teaching in your online course, is helping people just activate what's in them and through the elemental sounds on the drum. It's really beautiful, the course you're creating, and with the context of the mythos and the powerful meaning of this drum's lineage. But as you said, here we are today, and we know that there's these song lines that identify the research and the history and the cultural, cross-cultural significance. So yeah, how would you like to lead us in an experience so that we can, just feel it as a sound healing tool?
Sure. So when we're learning to play the frame drum in the tradition that I learned, and you also, Christine, have connections to this tradition, again, from North Africa via my teacher, Lane Redmond, we're learning to play the frame drum and the strokes through the elements. So what we do is we really begin with earth. So wherever you are in the world right now, I want to invite you to just tune in to your seat and what's beneath your seat, even if you're on a second floor apartment, for instance, to bring your imagination to this moment and drop your awareness down beneath you into the earth, into the roots, and even to feel your seat itself. And you can also bring awareness to tailbone. This is a somatic practice, and we think about the bones in the body as connected to the element of the earth. And then we would start to learn the earth stroke, which is pa sound. And different teachers teach this in a different way. But in the way that I learned it, it's a sticking. And so as I'm playing this rhythm of earth sound, pa, tune into the bones of your body and your ancestry. Take a few deep breaths. We call this the sliding pa. So it's sticking and sliding. And sometimes the pa would just stick. Starting very simply with a heartbeat like pulse. And you can tune into your heartbeat. Then we would learn the water stroke. You might listen in how it reverberates and almost ripples off the drum. You can tune into your lower belly or your womb space and the waters of your body, that which helps you to be fluid and hydrated. This is doom. And think about the waterways near you, the underground aquifers, the springs, whatever rivers are nearby. Bring heart to mind water near you. Even if it's just a little puddle or a dewdrop or the ocean, perhaps you're nearby. Bring to heart to mind water. Then we move up the body into the deep belly, and we move into our fire strokes. Imagine a flickering flame in a windless place in the deep center of your heart. These are our fire strokes that we learn on the drum, on the rim, like a ring of fire. The kind of fire that doesn't burn but illuminates. So we work with the fire stroke. And then our air. Bring your awareness up into your lungs. Sometimes working with the figure 8, the lemniscate, the infinity symbol. And take a few more deep breaths as you connect to the element of air. space. The silence between the notes, the space between the thoughts, and the space that's holding it all together and that's between everything. So just a little taste of how we work with the elements. We bring them directly onto the drum, and at the same time we're invoking them in our embodiment, in our somatic awareness. And then also using the mythic imagination to tune into the elements around us. And it's one of the things that makes this approach very universal, in that, of course, we're all connected to the elements, and it's beyond culture. It's something that embraces every culture, our human connection, our global connection to these elements. And especially during this time in our collective history, for each of us to bring more awareness to the elements can be very healing in itself. And so then we play the drum with awareness of the elements, and eventually we'll start to combine them, and it becomes, in a sense, an alchemy. And then we'll learn different rhythms, and we hold those rhythms consistently for a bit of time. I'm not going to do that here today, just because we want to set that context to move into trance with a lot of deep respect and a certain amount of time that we can really drop into that. But just to give you an idea of how we will then start to weave these rhythms together. And that was something that was very powerful from Hamza el-Din, again, this Nubian, North African. There was a lot of trance, and there is a lot of trance in that culture specifically. So you can learn more also by really attuning to that culture. You can learn more about that.
Yes, and he has some beautiful CDs. I always love listening to his voice and drum rhythms and oud playing. It's very meditative. The Wish is the one that I really love that he recorded, but he has many recordings. Okay, so because I'm so grateful to be interviewing you drummer to drummer, I thought it would be fun to have a kind of, question about asking you maybe on the drum, because one thing that I'm interested in is these rhythms that are odd meters, meaning they're not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and not even 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, these kind of like waltzy rhythms, or Afro-Cuban, as you love too. And what happens when we hear that odd meter? One I really love is this sort of like 5, 7, 9s. I just thought it'd be fun to have a drum conversation about what happens when we hear that in the sound healing of consciousness, as you brought up.
What happens when we hear the odd numbers?
Yeah, and what are some of the rhythms that you like? I think I'm a 5 mostly, or a 7.
I'm a 7. I'm definitely a 7. I've been working a lot with 7s lately, and I feel like 7's a magical number. And yeah, there is something about working with the odd time. A lot of our Western music is in the 4/4 time, and that also is really super cool, actually, and very trancy. And a lot of that comes from the Haitian tradition, actually, directly coming over to the Americas. And so we have a lot of trance actually naturally in our even 4/4 time, but the odd time rhythms are, yeah, I think they're really just a wonderful way to shift out of that thing that feels, in a sense, very even. There's that asymmetry to it that also I think probably works with the brain in a certain way.
Well, I'd like to hear your 7. I'll give you mine.
Is
And
that
I know for me, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. Is that part of the practice for you?
I was actually going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay,
Same
cool.
thing, different way of saying it.
Yeah,
Or yeah, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
yeah.
Double timing it. All these
Beautiful.
different ways, right?
It's beautiful to hear you play. And I'm curious, like, do you do that when you say, you're working a seven? How do you practice, as drumming in a spiritual practice for you personally, if I can ask that?
Oh, well, yes. It's been a lot of things over the years. I have a whole sort of theory on practice because when I first learned to play the drum, my teacher was half the country away. And so she was in Florida and I was in on the West Coast. And so it was really difficult. And there were no frame drum teachers around where I lived at the time. So I was a little bit in the crux of how am I going to do this? And I thought about it very consciously because I knew I really wanted to pursue it. So I made up this kind of way of practicing that I call the romance of practice. It's what I teach in the Sacred Drumming Academy as a whole module really on the romance of practice. And just to give you a little bit of that, for myself, it was actually very much ceremonial, sitting down and really creating like a little ritual for myself and something to kind of allure me into the practice because there's so many allurements out there in the world that to really make a choice and to really decide that we're going to really give our energy to one thing and then really a multiple of things. I'm a polymath, so there's many things, but focusing on one thing as a continuum and pulling that through line. So when I practice techniques and rhythms, and that's really kind of like brain gym time, we could say, where we're really working out certain compositions and different kinds of techniques, and I might drill techniques, do them over and over in a disciplined, almost mathematical way. And it's almost like we sometimes liken it to doing crossword puzzles or Sudoku, where you're really in that brain gym time to work with the cognition. And then I always leave time for free flow, improv, intuitive playing, because I really feel like there's an importance in that for people, especially modern people's, really to just allowing for whatever wants to come out. And that will also give us this adaptability when we are in ceremony that we can tune in to what is needed in the moment.
Well, is there anything else you would like to offer to the community of sound healing people that have gathered here today? And of course, would really encourage people to look into your course on sacred drumming with the Shift Network. It's happening now, and you can join in and and be empowered to bring this practice for trance, for healing into your life, for creative expression, and with all the wisdom that Krista brings and knowledge of her history and her research of all the lineages. So, yeah, is there anything else you'd like to impart into the community?
Well, I think it's an amazing subject that we're looking into with such a deep tradition, such a deep history. And I think putting it into context is important. And how we approach something like drumming and the way that we can create meaning out of that. And I think it's really personal. I named this academy the Sacred Drumming Academy, and sometimes people ask me, what is your intention behind sacred? And it's really up to the individual. It's very individualized. And I think that that's a very universal word and concept. And it's without dogma. It's what do you feel is sacred, and how can you bring that into your life? The drum is an accessible way to bring meaning making, sound healing, a sacred practice in, and to then feel how you might then share that with others. But also just to really keep it personal and individual in the beginning, and then eventually to be in circle with the drum, for instance. So I think there's a lot of applications. And as you know, Christine, there's modern research now on the potential of drumming as a tool It's not a cure-all, and I think we, don't need to overstate that as well, but it does have a lot of potential to shift the mind, to help with cognition, to bring us into our creativity, to make meaning. We can drum alone, we can drum with other people, and we're seeing more and more people using sound healing in clinical practice, and I think we'll see that more in the future, and bringing the drum or other modalities into different demographics, from the young ones, if you have children, to get some instruments and make music with your children. If you have teenagers, they're going to play their own music. And then as we come into our young adulthood, there's ways that, of course, we can bring music in. And I especially have an affinity for the elders, and for elders to be making music, even if they've never played before, to give it a try, because it's something then that you can be very simple with and just hold a rhythm down, like you saw me doing, just very simplistic today. And it can be something that can be a companion as a lifetime practice, really till our deepest elderhood. So it's really for everyone. And I just really appreciate you having me here today.
Thank you so very much, Krista Holland. And thank you all for tuning in and feeling the rhythm that is, of course, in all of us in this beautiful tradition of the frame drum.